Breast cancer, 90% of breast cancer is considered environmental, period, hands down, mic drop. 10% is considered, genetic, like a BRCA genes, which are very varied, which is why we should get into the heads of teenagers right out of the starting gate before they start putting tampons with chemicals and deodorants and all of these things that young people use for their lifetime.
Welcome to the Hunger for Change podcast. I'm Niklas Gustafson, and for the last decade, I've been my own guinea pig, reviving ancestral living and holistic health. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Aly Cohen, a board-certified rheumatologist and a leading voice in environmental medicine, whose latest book, Detoxify, reveals how everyday toxins silently hijack our hormones and immune systems. If you think being healthy just means eating clean and exercising, think again, because the biggest threats are in your tap water, toothpaste, mattress, and makeup, and most of them are still lethal. So Aly, welcome to the show, and thanks for joining me today.
Oh, thank you for having me.
First of all, what does health mean to you?
What does health mean to me? Wow, big question. I'll try to give a short answer. I think health is having some kind of grace or calm, because I associate mental health and physical health very closely. But I think real health is sort of this calm of knowing that you're just okay and you're doing your thing. So there's something about being okay with yourself physically and mentally that I think is just so important, and that's health to me.
Right. I've read your latest book, Detoxify, and it's really fascinating. I'm really curious to know, how did you get involved in this topic and this area of medicine?
Well, I can tell you, Niklas, it wasn't by choice. And I say that kind of tongue in cheek, but really the origins of this environmental health area that I became so immersed in 15 years ago came from a place of just pure sadness. I actually was a fully trained physician. I had gone on to do a fellowship in immune diseases and rheumatology. I had just gone out of training and I was practicing, had young kids. And then all of a sudden my dog became sick. And my dog was a 4.5-year-old golden retriever. It was, he was full of life. And then all of a sudden he became really sick. And so when we found out that he had autoimmune hepatitis, which is an immune disorder where the immune system attacks his liver, or even in humans, the same thing, it's so unusual of a diagnosis at such a young age that it just broke my heart. And I spent about a good, year, not just until he passed away, which was only 6 months, but I spent a good amount of time at that beginning looking to see what might have triggered his immune system against himself. I looked at his water, his air quality, his food quality. I looked at the toy that he sucked on that was kind of like a big red popular toy in the US and always was in his mouth. And flea and tick medications and everything that went around his body. But I really didn't understand at that time that the lack of regulations for pets in terms of their exposures really extended to humans. And it began this journey for me as an immune disease specialist, ironically, but also as a mom of pets and humans. I was just very concerned. And who knew that 15, years, 16 years later, that I'd be doing these environmental health evaluations on humans, let alone back then when it was really kind of a cursory, a dog evaluation.
Right. So why do you think people wait until they are sick to start asking questions? And how can we change that?
Yeah, look, humans are humans. I'm the same as everyone else. No one wants to do anything until it really affects you. And I make a joke, it's not so much of a joke, but no one does anything until they gain weight or they feel pain. It's like two things that jar your life, either emotionally or even physically. But we don't tend to do a lot of extra stuff until we feel there's a need. I do agree with you that too many people wait until they are sick to sort of get their world together in terms of some of their personal choices and lifestyle changes. A lot of people don't even know the connection, believe it or not, between our lifestyle, our exposures and health conditions, which is why this book was really written also to reach that population. Because we see a lot of biohackers, we see a lot of people that are sort of further along in the journey. And I'm trying to reach the people who have never even heard of this concept like I didn't 15 years ago. So I'm aiming for everyone in between, you know what I mean? But unfortunately or fortunately, you know, if you catch that moment of emotional response like I did with my dog, where it really affected my heart and it really made me concerned, I think those moments are really pinnacle moments, life-changing moments that can really change the destiny of your health or your life choices. And it has to kind of hit you in your heart. And fortunately or unfortunately, this dog's story has been the real impetus for my work. And I don't believe that I would be doing this work, honestly, if that dog had lived to a full golden retriever life, 10, 13 years of age. It wouldn't have happened, I don't think.
Do you think it might have to do also with the medical system? I mean, do you think the medical system actually wants people to get better, or is chronic disease just too profitable to give up?
This is such an important question. Coming from someone who's inside, who also uses tons of medications that are life-saving, as well as all of the approaches that are holistic and nutrition and diet. And, you know, I feel like at this point in my 22 years of medicine, I have a better perspective on the big picture. You know, the fact of the matter is that currently in the United States, medical training does not include nutrition to any extensive degree. It's usually 5 to 8 or 5 to 10 hours over the course of a 4-year medical school training. Certainly not brought into residency training or any type of specialty training off of medical school. We rarely hear about this in high schools, which is where I think it's most appropriate. And actually, I'm working very hard to try to get this into schools nationally as a basic science curriculum. But here's the thing, conspiracy theory or not, the fact of the matter is they don't want even free curriculum that I've offered 40 plus hours to 3 different deans of medical schools. And these are people that understand what I do. They like what I do. They support what I do. But they tell me, and this is truly the answer, that there's no room for it because they're really gearing towards symptoms and then solutions pharmacologically. So they're hitting people's lives and training, basically training, I guess, at when things happen and what to do about it pharmacologically. There's no prevention side. And I think, you know, I can't say every reason why. I know there's funding that comes from pharmaceutical industries into these teaching setups for sure. But, you know, the way I see it is complaining about it or too aggressively going against the system. I'm trying to work with the system. I'm trying to teach doctors now who are looking for this education that it's available, and hopefully it'll get cheaper as it becomes. There's more programs certainly available now for physicians to add this in. They just shouldn't have to, but they do. And so, yeah, I
so
think
there
that
will be a change. You see
I mean, I'm already seeing it. Yeah, I mean, I've written curriculum for environmental health and rheumatology, integrative rheumatology for 3 medical school training 3 physician training programs, which are integrative or functional medicine. So that's extra training. If that wasn't the case, obviously there wouldn't be a need for it. We build things when there's a need. And so I think between multiple programs being developed for physician and healthcare training, and also certainly the whole movement on social media to get more attention in these areas, I think things have changed dramatically since, you know, when I started the process.
So that's good news that it's actually, there is a change going on. Okay, so let's dig into toxins. What are immune disrupting chemicals, and how do they sneak into our bodies every single day?
So immune disrupting chemicals, that's a phrase that I actually coined because I had already done so much of the writing and communication of the endocrine disruption chemical work, which are my colleagues who do the bench research, who do the animal studies, really intense, well done academic peer-reviewed studies. They really discovered many of these, and they're international researchers, that about 25 years ago that many chemicals that were allowed into the US market for products had effects that were similar to hormones, which is why they were called and coined endocrine disrupting chemicals, or EDCs. And so for 2 books and for all the work up until this point, I've really joined in promoting the education and the sharing of this science and data on endocrine disruption. What started to interest me was, and having worked with some of my closest, researchers, including my co-author, Dr. Frederick von Saal, who's largely responsible for having bisphenol A or BPA taken out of plastic baby bottles in the United States. He's a really major endocrine disrupting chemical researcher, renowned. I said to him, we're seeing so much of how these chemicals also affect the immune system in ways that really link to autoimmune diseases and immune system disorders, not just hormone related changes of thyroid or insulin management or growth and development or fertility or brain development in utero. Those are certainly classic findings in terms of endocrine disruption. But what I was asking is, why are we not focusing now on immune system disorders? And what he said to me, he said, not only should it be written, but you should write about this because you have a background in rheumatology and medicine and you can make those links. And if I had not been given that blessing, I would not be pursuing this because this is someone I greatly respect and his community. That being said, these chemicals also have the effect of managing immune system function in a way that can be disruptive. So there can be increase in receptor levels in terms of target organs where things are supposed to respond. There could be breakdown issues of many of the enzymes in the body that are just not functioning properly in terms of, again, making these physiologic changes. Interestingly enough, every immune system cell, by the way, the immune system is incredibly complicated, as you can imagine, as you know, but it's incredibly complicated. But every immune system cell in the human body actually has estrogen receptors, amongst other types of hormone receptors. So we know that these are not siloed systems. They all cross-communicate. We know this even on a practical level because when we treat certain cancers, we develop autoimmune diseases as a sign of success for that cancer therapy, believe it or not. And that's a good thing. I mean, we want to save lives, but we also need to be aware that these are 2 systems that really do crosstalk. And so anyway, long story short, I looked at this and I said, well, we have these immune disrupting chemicals as well. Let's start to focus on those connections for people that will really hear that and try to make those connections to their own personal story, whether it's immune disruption or, autoimmune diseases or anything, food allergies. Another mechanism, which is kind of interesting, which applies to both types of chemicals, is the gut. When these chemicals get through our food system and our processed foods, especially, but certainly food packaging and, drinking water and get into the gut, they can have direct effects on the immune system ability of the gut as well. So I just, there's lots of mechanisms I mentioned in the book, but I wanted people to know it's just a reframing of how many of these chemicals have been identified as problems to the human body and normal physiology.
So what would you say are some of the first signs that your immune system is under attack? And how can we pick up those signs perhaps earlier and not wait too long?
Yeah, given the fact that people don't do much unless they really are affected, to your point, I think people thinking that belly issues, bloating, a lot of GI or gastrointestinal symptoms tend to be very common in terms of sort of the first signs that maybe the body is not experiencing something. I mean, it could be an all natural component like eggs or egg whites or whatever. I mean, I know personally family members who can't manage those kinds of foods. But in general, our gut is so telling to how we feel. And since we have so many inputs because we constantly are eating, we have much more opportunity to identify that as a component of irritation, whatever process it may be, as compared to, say, something we do once in a blue moon, like have, birthday cake with lots of icing or, drink, water is certainly, we don't identify also water with chemicals, or even lotions, like, rashes are very much a reaction to the human body to an outside component, whether or not synthetic or not. Your immune system is doing its job. And what you need to do is find out the story of your body to see whether or not those components are particularly irritating to your body. And it's not easy to identify, but usually when people sort of move in through the GI, stomach-related stuff, that's where I see the most people coming in. I also see fatigue as a major driver of appointments here. And I even talk about some of these cases in my book so that people can sort of identify what I'm looking for and how I sort of tease that out with appropriate lab work.
Mm-hmm. And how can someone be doing everything right? Eating clean, exercising, being outdoors, and still get sick? How is that possible?
The thing about our bodies and our lives as humans is it's so fluid. I mean, we have experiences like summer camp where I was sleeping on a really nasty mattress for 2 months, or, working in an area in a building where it might have been, moldy or had, cleaning products airing off. We can't always control our environments. And our lives are so fluid. Then we travel, and then we're in an airplane that may get sprayed, with pesticides because you're
horrible.
going to certain countries that do this. Literally walk down the aisle when I was going to South Africa, spraying pesticides as they're walking down the aisle. I was like dumbfounded. I even got a hold of one of the containers, even though I wasn't supposed to, and tried to research it because it was something that felt so out of my control. Like, why didn't you wait until I was...
I've experienced that as well. It's horrible.
Before, why aren't you not spraying before people come on the plane? I just didn't understand that whole process. But here's the thing. My argument for all the work I do, what I post, what I write about, is having agency over your body and your choices as best you can in a very complicated life and environment. If you're working in a place that you can't make changes, then you have to figure out ways to make it better. And then you want to control your home and places that you do have control over. Your car has choices you can make. Your home has choices. Here in my workplace here in New Jersey, I buy my own cleaning products for the cleaning service that comes in every week or 2 weeks or so. The idea is there are certain avenues that you can intervene where you have more control. And certainly when you eat, when you drink, in terms of water filtration, personal care products that we put on our skin. These are all areas that I talk about that anyone can participate in terms of making those choices healthier for your body.
Right. So you mentioned cleaning products in your home. What I'm just curious, what do you use?
So I tend, believe it or not, back in the early days when I was really scared and gung-ho at the same time and really proactive and had more time in my hands than I do now, I was making stuff. I was finding, just very simple recipes which are now in the book, by the way, which are just like white vinegar, sea salt for scrubbing because it's coarse, lemon juice that was real, not synthetic, Castile soap, some of the most basic, cleanest soaps. And I would make these concoctions, whether it was laundry detergent or it was surface cleaner. And now I have them in the book, but I don't have the time to do them anymore. So I wanted people similar to myself to be able to vet their products in the US market. I know there's something similar in the EU actually. But I wanted them to have the right resources from people who are toxicologists, who have no agenda. They're not from the American Chemical Council or ACC. There's lots of different people pushing back on this work because it's real dollars. I put all the resources of people, of groups I trust, like Environmental Working Group is a wonderful consumer advocacy group. And they have not only their website, ewg.org, but they have their app that's free called Healthy Living. My kids, my high school students, they look up all their products. And they make choices on their own without me. There's Yucca, Clearia, there's Think Dirty. I mean, so again, there's things that we can all do. It takes no time at all, but you are making better choices.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, white vinegar, I think it's awesome. We use it for cleaning here at home, and it's cheap. It's not complicated at all.
Not complicated. And even like, for instance, during COVID, I mean, that was a big issue where thousands of new compounds, because in the US there's no regulation, there's no testing, there's no oversight in terms of products. But COVID, the cleaning product industry and market in the US went nuts during COVID in this country. It was so upsetting to me because every commercial was loading on the fear tactics. Believe it or not, isopropyl alcohol or rubbing alcohol, 70%, which you can get at any local pharmacy in the wound care section, literally kills COVID and literally all these other viruses and bacteria. So the idea that we didn't have to do more than have a spray bottle of alcohol, it was really interesting to me. But again, like I said, when there's money to be made, there's lots that people do. So,
Right. So how many chemicals are we being exposed to daily?
well, it's hard to say. When I did my TED Talk, I tried to come up with a number, and this was 5 years ago. And I just kind of, walked through a day of my life, and I kind of thought about how many chemicals I was exposed to from what I knew at that time. And I kind of arbitrarily came up with 27. And I can pretty much assure you it's hundreds more in general, especially if you're not, into this topic yet. And then I multiplied that out by how many days I might be exposed to. So a week, a month, a year, 10 years, a lifetime. And it came into, the number was certainly like over 1 million exposures to whatever chemical, even if it's a good compound, right? Even if it's healthy. So our exposures are real, and they are over time, and they do potentially add up to harm, even at some of the lowest doses you can imagine, parts per billion, parts per million, parts per trillion. That was the way, endocrine disrupting chemicals were really understood, is that very, very low levels can do some of the same physiologic changes as very high levels. It's something, traditional toxicologists don't want people to know, because then it offsets some of the safety warnings for a lot of exposures. But what we now know is there's unusual science to the way they work, and that very low levels have enormous response, and that's scary to manufacturing, because humans now know this too, and that's why we have to be considering getting rid of these chemicals, not just thinking that the dose makes the poison in terms of exposure amounts.
So how did all these chemicals end up in our lives without our permission and without us knowing it?
Well, we have the going number in the U.S. is about 100,000, 95 to 100,000. But every year there are about 1,000 new compounds that are added to the market every year. About every week there's about 15 new compounds patented. And none of them are required to have testing before they go into the products that go onto the shelves, that go onto our bodies and our kids and our pets. So the idea that manufacturing has always been biased towards, in terms of regulatory oversight, there's none, and manufacturers are asked to do their own safety testing, and they are not required to do it, and they don't typically do it, and they certainly don't reveal what they find if they do it. So the idea is, in the 1940s and 50s in this country, we had chemicals upwards in the 1850s, more or less, in terms of synthetic compounds, mostly textile dyes. And then when we entered, sort of the Industrial Revolution, we had things like that were petroleum-based chemicals, because they helped make a lot of things move and run in terms of engines and machinery. Then we got into building materials that had their own, cyanide and certain different components that, treated wood and arsenic. We moved into all these different areas, and everyone was excited because we were saving natural resources. We were making life convenient. Even plastics in the 1940s and 50s helped housewives not have to clean up broken dishes, right? This was sort of the sell. And I get it. But what happened was we sort of let the horse out of the stable, and no one really can get all of those chemicals back into the bottle in terms of their testing alone. And believe it or not, right now with all the politics, I often say, we can really push for regulation, no doubt. I mean, there's lots of attention, which I really welcome, and regulation I've always welcomed. But in my own opinion, it's never been enough to do during the course of any one human lifetime. And if you have all those thousands of chemicals, and we're only picking out red dye number 3 this year and red dye number 40 next year, and then we got maybe a couple water contaminants, it's never going to add up. And so I've been through multiple administrations in the U.S. With different Democrat, Republican, and it's never changed my opinion that we really need to kind of do this for ourselves, right, and not entirely wait for regulation to help out.
Aly, in your book, Detoxify, you highlight how chemicals aren't just in our food and water, etc. They're also in the clothes we wear. Yeah. So are synthetic clothes making us sick? And why aren't we talking more about this?
Right. You know, it's interesting. I always think to myself, on the scale of what to be fearful of and work on individually, we all have our own priorities. I mean, you're sitting here looking at me with colored, blonde hair. I'd love to say I was natural, but maybe that was when I was born. I have to go to a lacrosse game with my kids, and they're all on Tire Crumb and all the latest turf, right? Life is about prioritizing. Clothing for sure has its own list of chemicals. There was findings for perfluoralkyls, which are sort of that big class of forever chemicals with the fluoride that kept them around forever in our environment, but also in our bodies as well. And that was found to be in a lot of workout clothes. Well, it's because those chemicals were designed as a function to reduce, stains and be waterproof and kind of, help with, sweating and being more slick on the skin and cooling efforts. But technically speaking, our skin is so important, but it's not, in my opinion, the highest yield change we could make if we had to choose. I would also think that food internally, water quality internally is really critical. It's not that you don't have to do all of it at once, you can, but I want people to think about prioritizing so they don't make themselves nuts. If you have workout clothes like I have for 20 years, I'm not sure if those chemicals are still in there. I want to stick with the old ratty ones because maybe the newer ones are so hard to tell.
The older they get, the more worn out they are, and
to some
releasing
degree.
less toxins, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would hope so. I mean, it makes logical sense to me, but then again, who knows if there's some kind of, the plastics release more chemicals because you're stretching them out. I don't know. But I think these are the things that you can make yourself crazy over. Now, the solution is very simple. You just find clothing that it's 100% organic, which is everywhere. So who says we have to work out in stretchy clothes all the time? That's a marketing movement, right? Sports clothes, athletic gear tends to be more marketed than actually have anything to do with real comfort. I mean, I love cotton when I sweat. I don't care if I look like I have sweat pits and whatever. You just have to decide what you want. But yeah, I think we need to just prioritize. And I did that in the book with the 4 A's. And it was just my easiest way of helping people walk through a really difficult conversation in a way that just made sense,
So please tell us about these 4 A's. I think it's really interesting, and it's easier to remember actually the important points. Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate you asking. So the 4 A's was something that just made it seem simple to add, when I was teaching high school and middle school and even doctors. What I'm telling people to do in sort of a really logical way. So the first A of the 4 A's is assess. So how do we assess the starting point? Well, I put in a 50 question survey, which is basically you put a 1 or a 0, you add up the numbers at the end of the 50 questions, and you see where you're starting from. And it's questions that they're not out of this world. They're really reasonable questions about, do you dry clean your clothes? Do you filter your water? Do you look up your cosmetics? And it's not about shaming or judging or anything of that sort. It's about sort of getting an assessment at the beginning of a journey that may take you a short time or may take you a long time. It's up to you. But assessment is first A. The second A is avoid or swap, but I left that out. But it's really avoid because we don't really need 20 cleaners in our kitchen. We don't need a carpet cleaner and a sink cleaner and a surface cleaner and an oven cleaner. I mean, if you think about all the marketing that the cleaning product industry has really done to our heads and thinking that we're so dirty, it's remarkable. And dirt's not a bad thing, as you would agree. Like, real regular dirt and soil and just microbiome level, conversation.
Completely natural.
Right. We don't need all of these chemicals. And in fact, it does do disservice to our immune system in many ways because we're not seeing such a variety of microbes. But needless to say, avoid is really figuring out what you can live without. Figuring out what are better swaps by looking up, a lipstick or a shampoo or body spray that you would prefer to use that's maybe less toxic. So the first is assess. The second is avoid or swap. The third is really kind of critical because you can take as many chemicals away, in my opinion, as you want, but you can't do much with the human body and physiology unless you add in things that have been part of human evolution for millions of years. Clean water, clean food, sweating to help remove many of the chemicals, but that believably and surprisingly we are seeing in modern day times. how sleep really helps what we call the glymphatic system around the brain and spinal cord. It's really our cleaning process while we sleep. So adding in quality and quantity of sleep that's really efficient. Adding in components of nutrition that offset some of the even epigenetic changes from environmental chemical exposures that translate through generations, believe it or not. We can eat foods that really offset that, like omega-3s. We can quercetin, being nutrient sufficient with iron and calcium and a bunch of these nutrients that unfortunately we're seeing a lot of nutrient insufficiency, I call it. Adding in cruciferous vegetables as a class are remarkable at upregulating the liver function in terms of breaking down chemicals. So this add piece is so critical, not just taking away chemicals, but how do we get the body at a cellular level to thrive?
Right.
Just go back
What
in
about
time.
adding being outdoors, getting sun exposure?
Nature, sunlight.
That sort of
We have so much
right?
air. We have so much. We think about air pollution. We have so much light pollution that's synthetic. We have noise pollution that has been associated with heart disease increase, especially if you live near airports. I mean, great studies showing how our modern day life is sort of chipping away at what our real anthropologic genes and gene expression would like to be doing. So, I think it's really important. That add piece is so critical. Reducing stress in modern day times, whichever way you can manage that. I mean, these are all things that were not part of the modern day human. And then the last A, just to sum it up, is really the fourth A is allow. And I put the allow in to kind of compensate for my hair coloring and my occasional pedicure and, birthday parties and travel. I think you need to have a certain amount of allow in your everyday concept of this topic, because it's not about perfection. It's about being realistic, and it's about progress. And I think once people believe that and own that, they do so much more than they would if they were told that they're terrible and they should have done this better. And, maybe they ate that during the pregnancy and that's why their child has a disability or why they have breast cancer. I don't believe in any of that. I feel like there's no room for that. I think when you know better, you do better. And it's just a journey for everybody.
Aly, what's one product people use every single day that you would never let in your house?
Air freshener. Don't understand the concept. Air fresheners are literally filled with chemicals, at least the ones in this country. They're often filled with propellant and phthalates and a bunch of hormone and immune disruptors. So I say open windows, add plants, and search out different products so that you don't have to be exposed to those chemicals.
I couldn't agree more. I hate those air fresheners. So why are kids and teens especially vulnerable to environmental chemicals?
Well, as anyone would imagine, when you're popped out into the world, we really have less defenses. Otherwise, we'd pop out as adults, right? So we pop out of our parents and we kind of grow. And as we grow, our detoxifying pathways become stronger. Our food choices become broader, which, as I mentioned earlier, what you eat and how much you eat of it and what compounds are in that food can really be very effective for environmental chemical reduction in terms of their effects. So vulnerability and what we call sort of the vulnerable periods of human development include not just the in utero experience. So we know that the placenta, unfortunately, does not block against many thousands of chemicals that mom is exposed to. And it's not to blame mom. It's just to really show this issue. So we know in utero is very much a vulnerable period of human development. Brains are developing, body parts are developing, sexual dimorphism in terms of how the brain or the body turns into potentially one sex or another. All of these things have effects. IQ is affected in terms of even fluoride from mom drinking fluoride can have effects on fetal IQ. So we know that there's a lot of stuff there. Then when a child is born, a child is still in a vulnerable period of human development because their growth spurt is so huge.
Yeah.
So that's another area. In terms of their size and exposure, they breathe in more air and eat more drink more water and eat more food than an adult. So their exposures tend to be higher. They're also on the ground, touching toys which have dust, which is known to contain a lot of household chemicals. And so they have hand-to-mouth behavior. And again, they don't eat very broadly, so that decreases their ability to handle some of these exposures. teenagers, like my two teenage boys, they are in an incredibly important vulnerable period of human development because that's when their hormones are raging. And when hormones are being broken down and developed and released all over the place, I mean, mine didn't even talk to me this morning on the way to school. We know hormones are like wreaking havoc on their brains, but the idea that this is also considered a vulnerable window where environmental chemicals may have more effect.
Yeah.
And the other thing about teens is they use more personal care products in 24 hours than any other demographic. Just ask my kid and all his cologne. I mean, these kids stink. I mean, they're using a million different products. They love it. I love that they love it. I love that they're into this. But this is kind of where we want to intervene and say, you know what? You want some products for this, that, the other? Why don't you look it up? And if it's this level or below, I'll buy it for you or what have you. So I think that's another area where we can intervene. And then even menopause, believe it or not, people, you don't realize that menopause for women is really a critical or a vulnerable window because they too are having a lot of hormone changes where, again, these environmental chemicals may play a role. So, they're sectioned out periods, but in general, I look to everyone to not worry about those periods, but really dive in at any stage of their life for this kind of education.
Yeah. And what do these chemicals, these toxins, actually do at the cellular or immune level?
So at the cellular level, we know that cells get inflamed. We call that a part of this innate or primitive immune system. And then we also have the adaptive immune system, and they communicate to each other. I don't necessarily want to go too deep into this. It's mind spinning. But essentially, we know at a cellular level that there's a surveillance system called the inflammasome, which are proteins that are units within each cell that are actually sensing when foreign chemicals come into the body. This can trigger a lot of different responses from an immune system perspective. For one, the human immune system may have go through what's called molecular mimicry, where it's recognizing chemicals as foreign bodies that are so similar in terms of their makeup, their compound makeup, that they're looking now at the human body that looks very similar to those synthetic compounds and reacting. So that's how you end up getting autoimmune reactions where the body doesn't understand, that self is itself. We call it self-antigens. But that's one component. There's other components, apoptosis is another one where the body's ability to turn its cells off. We have a natural dying process. That is dysfunctional. We've seen that with lupus and a variety of other autoimmune diseases. And then there are things that are not autoimmune per se, but they're reactive to the world around you. So like food allergies. That has become rampant, as we know, over the last several decades. And so that's really where the body's been sort of sensitized to react to a lot of things that maybe it wouldn't have if it was seeing less of it. Right. And so that can be natural stuff like peanuts, but it could also be synthetic chemicals that are used in everyday products. So I think that's kind of one place to think of it, is that the body at every stage, whether it's cellular or organ or even systemic in terms of communication with hormones and immune system messaging, there's disruption potentially along all of those lines. Clinically speaking, talking about teens, people can wrap their head around the fact that we've now had an earlier shift in terms of puberty. A couple hundred years ago, kids went through puberty at age, 15, 16, 17, both boys and girls. And we now have seen a major shift in that. We're seeing puberty starting as early as 8, 9, and 10. So, these are legitimate, tangible findings that we're seeing. And a lot of that has been implicated from, or I should say, the implication is that it's coming from these environmental chemicals that have the ability to mess with hormones.
They mess with our hormones and can even change when puberty starts, right?
For sure. And that actually potentially increases risk for other things that we're not thinking about. But when you're getting your period younger, for instance, in young women, you're exposed to estrogens for a longer period of time, and that increases your risk essentially for breast cancer. I'm not talking about hormone therapy. That's a whole different topic. I don't want people to get freaked out about that. But I'm talking about in terms of innate hormones that are like estrogens that are actually cyclical in terms of your periods for longer periods of time. that exposure is linked to higher risk of, breast cancer. And that's just one example of where that plays directly from exposure into clinical disease. Breast cancer, 90% of breast cancer is considered environmental, period, hands down, mic drop. 10% is considered, genetic, like a BRCA genes, which are very varied. But in terms of strict genetics that we now know of in modern day times, 90% is really environmental, which is why we should get into the heads of teenagers right at the starting gate before they start putting tampons with chemicals and deodorants and all of these things that young people use for their lifetime.
So in your book, you suggest sauna bathing as a detox method, right? And considering our ancestors, they naturally sweated out toxins, being outdoors, being very active. Is sauna used today kind of a hack to balance out our sedentary lifestyle?
Sauna is fantastic. I look at sauna and sweating, and I look at exercise too. Any which way to sweat. But exercise has a variety of other benefits in terms of flooding the liver with more volume of blood, the lymphatic system I talk about in the book, in terms of it's another pathway of clearing house from the blood from exposures and breakdown products from normal cellular activity. But sweating in and of itself has been part of our existence. Modern day humans, we don't move as much. When we move, it's in short periods at the gym or running or whatever, which I do, but we don't have hours and hours of chasing chickens or hours and hours of walking to find the seeds or certain vegetation. We just live very differently, and yet our genetic template hasn't changed that much. And so I encourage sweating, especially with my patients who can't walk or run because they have arthritis. As a rheumatologist, I encourage them to do sauna. To do, wear extra layers. I ran this morning actually, and I had all these extra layers. You'd think I was running in 20-degree weather, but I'm actually running in warm weather because it's my opportunity to sweat more than if I was just trying to cool down with some of this, athletic gear, right? I'm trying to sweat more, not reduce that.
Right. I've become a sauna addict myself. I just love sauna.
Well, you're Swedish, right? So isn't that genetic?
Yeah, maybe. Even the people from Finland are even more into sauna than we are. But Nordic countries, we love sauna.
Yeah.
And I've become to just love sauna in combination with cold plunges. So I do sauna, cold plunge, and then back in the sauna.
Wow, you're my hero. Amazing. I'm not sure I'm going to get into the cold plunges anytime soon, but I support all of these natural approaches, non-invasive.
Yeah.
Bells and whistles, IV infusions. I get very concerned about all of these things before doing all the very basics first, like you're describing. You're embracing anthropology, and I love that.
Totally, yeah. Okay, someone's drinking tap water and thinking they're doing everything right. What don't they know?
In most modern day countries, in most first world countries, I can't speak to third, we have water systems that are often underpowered. They're not efficient enough to take the contaminants that make their way into our water systems. In the United States, 85% of the U.S. population is serviced by wastewater treatment plants that follow old laws with poor infrastructure. So I encourage everyone to do water filtration, any stage, any amount, any type, all the way through the kinds that I talk about in the book. But water filtration is kind of key in terms of modern day experience.
Great. I recently upgraded we had a triple system filter at home. And then a couple of weeks ago, actually, I upgraded to a reverse osmosis filter. And I heard that you think that's the best filter you can get. Is that right?
Yes. I've been trying to research this as much as someone who is in the medical field can do. My dad is a nephrologist, and he has been managing reverse osmosis water, believe it or not, for dialysis patients since the 70s, when dialysis was first available for the average human consumer, right? And so they've required reverse osmosis to prevent infection, really was the original plan. Since that time, we have compounds that are far bigger. And so they're getting caught in reverse osmosis because by definition, reverse osmosis is based on pore size in terms of how big the compound is. Right. So it's a strainer, for no better, words. And the idea is reverse osmosis is critical to, removing the most contaminants that we now know of in the consumer market. And I encourage people to do any filtration, even carbon block, which is a pitcher or refrigerator door, all the way through to the choice of reverse osmosis, which in the United States is much, much cheaper than it's ever been.
So could you mention some of the chemicals, some of the toxins that you actually get rid of with reverse osmosis that you don't get rid of with the other filters?
Yes. And so in terms of just the mechanism to begin with, carbon block, water runs through quickly. And the quicker water runs through is much more convenient, of course, but it has less time to filter off those chemicals. Whereas the reverse osmosis, you're basically having water go through much more surface area and going into a tank in general. So you're removing a lot more. It's like making water while you sleep. We know that some of the most common contaminants in the United States tend to be industrial chemicals for sure. So manufacture runoff of lead, sometimes mercury, certainly added chemicals like fluoride, which there's a huge scientific dispute on this, but most of the science ends up on the fact that this is not good for most human beings. There's other ways to strengthen your teeth and avoid dental caries. There's also added detergents at these wastewater treatment plants, which are required and necessary, including chlorine, that are added so that we don't have, go back to the 1800s in terms of, disease and pathology. So we know that there's lots of things intentionally added. We know that there's runoff, like sewage becomes drinking water in the US. I know it's hard for people to believe this, but literally sewage goes right back into these treatment plants. Any environmental chemicals through the air or soil goes into our aquifers, ends up on lakes and streams. They end up into our wastewater treatment plants. So it's up for grabs. It changes by climate in terms of temperature. It changes by floods and any kind of natural disasters in terms of flooding, even of wells that people have. So there's lots of, even spray season in terms of, whenever there's crops that are going to be rotated and they have more water runoff that has pesticides or fertilizer chemicals. So there's so much variability. Again, I'm a Taurus. I hate variability. I hate change. So I figured, you know what? Let's fix it when it hits your home. When it hits your home, you don't have to worry about tornadoes. You don't have to worry about which manufacturer dumped in the water or not. You get to control it when it hits your home, point of use. And that's what I really encourage people to think about. I have one here at work because it was $275 and $150 for a plumber to put in 1 hour. And so I have a reverse osmosis under my sink here, and I have one at home. And some people do whole house filters. I think they're very pricey. And some people just choose to do for cooking and drinking, which is our number one way to get some of these contaminants removed.
Yeah. But I mean, these reverse osmosis filters, they're not as expensive anymore. They were really expensive before it, but they're less expensive now. Aly, if you had 60 seconds to save someone's health with one piece of advice, what would that be?
I would say, like I said to teenagers recently, your body is a sponge. If you keep that in mind throughout your life, know that your body will absorb all that's around it, whether it's stress, whether it's food chemicals, whether it's water chemicals, or anything you put on your skin, or even feminine care products. If you keep that mindset and not worry about the minutia of one chemical, one toxin, or one thing you did right or one thing you did bad, think about your body as a sponge, and it will change a lot of what you do naturally as how you walk through your life.
So let's dig into detox. Is the wellness industry helping people detox or just confusing them more?
Well, the wellness industry is wonderful in many ways because it's filling a gap in traditional medicine and traditional Western training in terms of nutrition and diet and awareness that food matters and food is medicine. But I do believe it has also swung pretty far in terms of how to make a profit off of that industry. And even many physicians, unfortunately, have to move into profitizing what they're doing in order to get out of Western medicine in terms of salaried jobs. So I do worry about this quite a bit. And I have many people in medicine that I would not agree, are doing the best for their patients in terms of too much testing, maybe too many products sold under their own label, perhaps, who knows? All I can say is integrity matters, and whether it's finding a guy or a gal who can repair your car or fix your computer or solve your health issues, you have to do your research. You have to, really figure it out, because you will shell out lots of money that may be necessary, but often is testing that I would rather people put into the solutions, like paying for a reverse osmosis water filter instead of getting a battery of tests to see how toxic you are. I really, in my book, also want people to have the ability to use their own health insurance, not have to pay out of pocket. So here are the codes that doctors use in the US on a prescription when you go to the commercial labs that are covered. That to me is useful because then the healthcare provider can assist in helping you get those answers without having to feel like they know what they have to know about environmental health. So I think everything we do has to be researched, thought about, be thoughtful, take a deep breath, know that there's no miracles. There's no miracle pills or solutions or detox cleansing. It's a process. And hopefully that puts people in a little bit better mindset for, instead of just buying new products and trying new stuff that might be a little bit unsafe.
Mm-hmm. When you talk about, that the products may not even be safe, why do you think we are so easily sold on health products that don't work, or worse, that they're even dangerous?
Well, I can tell you as a human female who, fights the concept of getting older, that when I see a new cream or some process that makes me feel at my primal core, independent of education, that I'm going to look prettier or younger or live longer, I'm not going to lie to you and tell you it doesn't affect me. But I feel like I have to balance it with what I've learned through science and education and understand that, getting things done with instant gratification does not always serve us well. I know that's more of an immature child, teenager type of thing. But when we move into adulthood, we have to resist some of that temptation. Even I say that to myself because we all want quick fixes, but nothing in life is typically a quick fix. It takes work and thoughtfulness and real, I think, being judicious with your thought process.
Mm-hmm. So if we take a look at nutrition for a moment, what role does nutrition play in protecting us against environmental exposures? And could you tell us about your anti-chemical dietary pyramid? Because I know you wrote about this in your book.
I looked at, what we're seeing in terms of just nutrition. And nutrition is such an critical part of human evolution and healthiness and being able to ward off, major terrible responses to infection or even cancers. And so nutrition is the fertilizer. And I have a whole set of the 4 fertilizer supplements, even beyond just the quality of our food, to think about, because we're just not getting even the amount and the right quality and consistency over time of nutrients that keep our bodies healthy, keep our cells healthy. And so we're grossly deficient in vitamin D3. We're grossly deficient in magnesium in general. I mean, obviously there's variability amongst everyone I'm talking to or who's listening.
Aly, why are we deficient in those?
Our lifestyle to begin with. I mean, vitamin D3 typically used to come from the sun. We don't spend time outdoors. We have sunscreen that blocks vitamin D. We have food that doesn't have enough vitamin D because of the food system having food travel long distances to supermarkets. Soil is deplete, or of all of these many soil nutrients that we've needed for millions of years. That goes in through the produce that we eat. And so when people think about fresh vegetables at the supermarket, I counter with, guess what? Frozen organic vegetables are a far better choice because they're flash frozen when they're picked, and then they're sealed in that nutrition. And they also don't have necessarily the chemicals from pesticides and fertilizer chemicals if they're USDA organic. Exactly. So our mindset about growing up and having fresh vegetables on the tables really has changed, in my opinion. I mean, we have local markets, but they're not all year round. I think they're great, and supporting local farmers is fantastic. But for all of the rest of us who don't grow our own food or don't have those markets or don't have time, I think people should be really considering frozen USDA organic. And I know there's the equivalent in the EU of organics. EU. So, unfortunately, our food system has in many ways, disappointed the modern human in terms of nutrition and physiology. And not only should we be thinking about getting it from different places like frozen organics, we have to add in certain supplements that we'll never get enough of, even in the best situations and the best diets that we think we have. And that includes vitamin D, and includes a great multivitamin that fixes a lot of B's and C's, and iodine that protects the thyroid gland that we don't think about.
Magnesium,
so
iodine.
It's really more of a big picture thing when I talk about those supplements. It's not instead of doing the work of food and good quality food and water. It's really to supplement, as they should, to help us nutrify our body.
Right. Why is iodine
Yeah,
so
iodine is so
important to us?
interesting to me. Iodine really is one of those nutrients. So first of all, we don't make it. Our human bodies don't make it. We have to get it outside of our bodies. Number one. Number two, it sits in the thyroid gland and actually really protects the thyroid gland from a whole host of environmental chemicals and radiation. If you've ever watched any of the movies about nuclear fallout, like Chernobyl, what's the first thing they hand out to anyone exposed to nuclear radiation is iodine tablets. And that has a lot to do with the fact that our gland is so superficial. And it's so vulnerable to things such as radiation. But it also is vulnerable to many of the chemicals in food washes and everyday chemicals. So by the fact that we're not getting a little iodine every day like we would from, eating fresh fish, which I don't encourage too much of, but still we don't get enough from eating that. Many people don't have that in their diet, but we also don't get it in places where it's supplemented back in the 1950s in the US as a public health measure. It's not in bread anymore. It used to be, because no one eats bread a lot. It used to be in table salt, but most people have sea salt or Himalayan or kosher or Celtic, which is unprocessed. So there's no iodine in there. And so now we're deficient as a culture, as a species in iodine. And so part of my messaging on the multivitamin is choosing a multi that has 150 micrograms of iodine, and that typically will tell you it's a good multi because they've thought of it. And even pregnant women, really should have enough iodine because that iodine passes through breast milk to the baby in terms of IQ level. So you don't want to take too much, but you don't want to take none. And it's really about consistency and getting a little bit every day.
Could you tell us about the 21-day plan you write about in your book and why you
So I
created
wanted
this?
to make it easy for people because it is just such an overwhelming topic for a lot of people. And so the 21-day plan really begins sort of at the end of the book, but it really says, listen, here's a symptom tracker. I have a sort of a set of symptoms from headaches all the way to abdominal pain, bloating, that kind of thing. You can start with a symptom tracker if you choose, because if you're not feeling well, that's a good place to start. So you can see how you do at the end of the 21 days. But the 21 days was divided in sections like the 4 A's. So the first week is assess. The second is avoid or swap. The third week is add. And the last is allow. And the idea was to really implement that mindset through a very reasonable set of changes that we can all make. And here's what you do day 1 and day 2. Very, very easy, handheld, not a lot of, major deep thought. It's more about how do you just get started in the process. It's not a solution 100%, but it's really the best way that I could see people jumping into this topic and really feeling empowered.
Great. Aly, you built a strong voice in the US, and the thing is that here in Europe, many Europeans are just waking up to the same issues with food, with water, everyday toxins. Would you consider expanding your presence in Europe to help elevate the conversation around
Well, I've never been to Spain,
health?
so please invite me over. No, listen, first of all, I
You're
appreciate it. I'll
invited.
see you, and you might regret that. But anyway, the thing about this book is that it actually is getting a lot of attention on the back end from publishing. So it has a contract with HarperCollins now to be in UK, all of the UK. Actually, we just have a deal now with China. Who knew? So, the idea is that people are seeing, I think, this issue and really embracing the topic, but they want to do it in a way that's not going to overwhelm. And I would hope that this spreads. I encourage school systems to buy one copy and share with their teachers and their students. I want it to grow very organically in a way that people feel comfortable. And I would expect that over the next couple of years, this is going to get even more popular around the world. Unfortunately, I would say that it's going to also get popular because people are sick and people are getting sicker. And that has really been the premise of why I wrote this book, was because I'm seeing more and more people at younger ages getting sicker with things they should never have or maybe wouldn't be expected at a young age, like rheumatoid and lupus and food allergies. So I think where there's a need, there's going to be a fix. And I think once people, unfortunately, get a little bit uncomfortable with their bodies in some way, illness or not, they're going to start looking for solutions. And I hope this will be part of their solutions, is to really think globally about what our bodies experience on a day-to-day basis.
There are big differences between the US and Europe. I think it's kind of frustrating to see that we still allow thousands of chemicals in consumer products. And how is that possible when that a continent that bans, you can't get raw milk, in Europe, and still we have carcinogens in cosmetics, and there are so many toxins that should be banned, but they're not.
Yeah, it's really interesting. The EU in general has a much better, I would say, much more stringent regulatory system in terms of how these chemicals get identified, get tested, and are allowed or not allowed to go into their products, into the market in the EU. One of the simplest ways I recently, from colleagues tried to figure out why that is that in the EU, the scientists are separate from the regulators. The scientists are separate, so they can really make their recommendations scientifically, but they're really based in science. And then there's the regulations and the management that are sort of not in bed with the scientists. There's value to that. In the US, we don't have that. The US EPA actually is both. And actually, there's a revolving door even with the pharmaceutical industry in terms of regulation and oversight, and even with medication. So, when this has occurred, it's very hard to pull that back. There's no question that EU does it better, and Canada does it better. And now we have California with Prop 65 is very much, ahead of any other state in the country in terms of really forcing manufacturers to do it better, because if you have to create a separate product that's cleaner for California, you're going to end up doing it for the whole country. So I think that when we allow states to get on board now, because nationally we're not seeing as much movement as you would think, or that we, because there's a lot of lobbyist manufacturing pushback, as much as, there's a push now and more visibility. I would tell you, there's a lot on the backstory that people haven't heard about in terms of water quality that's being rolled back, regulations. And
oh, really?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, we see a lot of interesting things in the front side with red dye number 3, or a push for food chemicals, but we're not understanding that in the backside, we're allowing polluters to actually pollute water systems more, because there's lots of other stuff that goes into human health that's not just in the media. And I think that
I can imagine
pulling away NIH studies and researchers, I think, is really scary, because this is how a lot of the work we already have now developed, was because of wonderful academic bench research that really identified some of these chemicals as being problematic. It wasn't the manufacturers, it's academic centers. So I think we just need to keep an open mind where we can improve, and that it's all connected, and that when we have EU colleagues that are internationally working with US colleagues, this is how we get the conversation moving and do better. There's a whole host of people doing such great work that we want to keep them active and keep them in this country doing what they've been doing very well, as far as I'm concerned. Yeah.
I'd like to know, where can people find more information about this environmental health topics in general?
Yeah, in general. So in the book, I have tons of resources. I will say that all of the favorite places that I look for the best science is really in the book, because if you want to jump off and dive into deeper stuff, that's available. I do post a lot on my website, thesmarthuman.com. So it's thesmarthuman.com, anthropologic. You might pick up on that, Niklas. And also The Smart Human on TikTok, on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook, and even the Smart Human podcast, which I have, which really, I interview people that never get a voice, or a lot of people who don't, which are the researchers that create the science that becomes the headlines. So I really dive into some of the most wonderful researchers, physicians on integrative medicine in terms of cardiology, and pediatricians. And I just really want to bring some of the stuff that I learned to the public. And these are folks that don't generally get asked to be on podcasts. So it's wonderful and eye-opening. So people can check out that
on your
podcast.
website. Okay.
And I also have small courses on my website, thesmarthuman.com. Yeah, and the website, so if you look through, you can actually find courses that are very small on heavy metals, on EMF radiation, on pesticides, And then my practice, if people want to actually have a medical practice consult, I do that internationally through telemedicine, and that's Aly, A-L-Y, CohenMD.com. So AlyCohenMD.com.
Is there anything you think that we should have talked about today that we missed out?
I'll tell you, first of all, this has been such a wonderful interview because you've hit every topic that I love to talk about, and I think in such a comprehensive way. So I applaud you for that. It's been wonderful. And also, I just want to mention that, the fact that you're even interested in this and you're over the ocean and across the world, it's so heartwarming that you saw an opportunity when I reached out to you and you really made it happen. And it takes a village to move this information forward. So I appreciate you, and I really appreciate being asked on this podcast that, we all support each other in this work. It's really quite important. And, I think you're doing awesome stuff also. So
It is important. And I appreciate very much your time. It's been great talking to you. So let's stay in touch.
Yes, please. And I'll see you in Spain.
Yes. And now this is you in New Jersey. I've never been. So
you are welcome to come. It's a fun place. So please come.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This was just one episode. There's so much more to discover. Check out the full podcast series, subscribe for future episodes, and let me know your thoughts in the comments.